How's everybody doing? I wish you all well and hope you wish the same for me. I'm going to speak about two of the most memorable bosses in Gambino history. Not only were they complete opposites, but many people feel only one of them had the makings of a boss. So let's dig into Neil Dellacroce and Paul Castellano. One of the most important facts to recognize is that although both Dellacroce and Castellano were born in the United States, Dellacroce raised in Manhattan and Castellano in Brooklyn, their traceable ancestry sets them very far apart. Dellacroce's family were Napolitan, while Castellano's family was Sicilians. And to just further touch on that distinction between the two, most Sicilians were raised distrusting Napolitans. If you take a look at Gambino family history, Vincent Mangano hailed from Sicily, as well as Carlo Gambino. So you have a family with deep Sicilian roots. I can't stress enough the significance of that fact. For most people, when they hear the name Paul Castellano, they think of a mob boss who was more of a businessman that sat in his big white house, which understandably is how he spent his later years. But Castellano did come up in the street, and as a young guy, he followed his father Giuseppe's footsteps into the Mangano family. And prior to that, he ran numbers for his father. He became inducted sometime in the 1940s. Dellacroce, on the other hand, who was about a year older, became a member in the late 1930s. And before I forget, both of them Americanized their birth names. Dellacroce, named Anello, would go by the name Neil, and Castellano, who was named Constantino, was said to have despised that name and used his middle name instead, Paul. Castellano's cousin, Carlo Gambino, was also a member of the Mangano family, and by the early 1930s, he would do something that would play a significant role in Castellano's future. Gambino married his cousin, Catherine, who happened to be Paul's sister, thus cementing that family bond, making Gambino and Castellano both cousins and brother-in-laws. The early 1950s found the Mangano family cast into internal conflict between Mangano and his underboss, Albert Anastasia. Keep in mind, Mangano was Sicilian and Anastasia Calabrese. As a result, on April 19, 1951, Mangano disappeared, and Anastasia took control of the family and made Dellacroce a captain in the process. Carlo Gambino was the Anastasia family's underboss, and Castellano a soldier in the family. Anastasia's reign as boss was short-lived, and his days were numbered due to a conspiracy led by Vito Genovese and Carlo Gambino to take him out. Their ulterior motives meshed, and on October 25, 1957, Anastasia was shot to death as he sat in a barber's chair at the Park Sheraton Hotel. Following Anastasia's death, Gambino took over the family that still bears his name to this day. Most likely, this was the result of agreement he had made with Genovese. As boss, he made his cousin Castellano a captain, and even took him to the infamous Appalachian meeting that following month on November 14, 1957. The outcome of that meeting, or rather following the Appalachian mess, resulted in one of the two arrests that Castellano would have. The first was in 1934 for robbery, which he served a year for, and he would wind up doing a few months for refusing to testify about the Appalachian meeting, unlike Dellacroce, who's had numerous arrests during his lifetime. Dellacroce was said to have been very close, as well as loyal, to Anastasia, but remained true to Cosa Nostra and accepted his demise. It's more than likely Dellacroce remained the captain, and both he and Castellano would thrive under Gambino's rule. In fact, in 1965, Gambino took his underboss, Joe Biondo, down and replaced him with Dellacroce. Supposedly, as an added good faith gesture, he gave Dellacroce control of the Manhattan and Queens crews, as well as the lion's share of what the crews kicked up. Gambino's reasoning possibly had to do with him being fully aware that Dellacroce could have struck back after Anastasia was killed, but chose not to. I'll be speaking about who Gambino ultimately chose as his successor, but it's important to note, and it's quite possible, that Castellano felt slighted when his cousin opted for Dellacroce and not him to be the underboss. But Gambino, being the fox that he was, probably figured to pick Castellano would be viewed by Dellacroce as a back-to-back proverbial slap, with the first slap being killing Anastasia. Gambino also benefited from having Dellacroce as his underboss. Dellacroce not only had a fearsome reputation, but was respected by all the families and its members. With Dellacroce's backing, Gambino became a leader among commission members. I don't know if he headed the commission or held the title of boss of bosses, but he absolutely had a strong, respectable presence at commission meetings. Nonetheless, there were reports that claim of a possible plot by Dellacroce to make a power play and overthrow Gambino. In one FBI report, it's made up of something that a source told them. According to the source, as early as 1967, Gambino was experiencing health issues and began using Paul Castellano in an acting boss capacity. And again, this is according to the source. It was also known back then that Dellacroce would not be succeeding Gambino as boss of the family. A 1970 hearing held by a joint legislative committee, Edward J. McLaughlin, the committee's general counsel, claimed that Dellacroce was seeking Gambino's position for himself while telling other underworld leaders that he wanted the position for Joanne Gallo, who was a captain in the family at the time. This is in reference to the famous meeting that took place at La Stella restaurant in Queens, a statement I felt I debunked in a video I previously posted titled La Stella Meeting, and I'll add a link down in the description. In that video, I mentioned the theory like the one stated above, where Dellacroce and Gallo were seeking to overthrow Gambino. However, Gambino was at that meeting, so I highly doubt a discussion to overthrow him took place. Outside of the meeting at La Stella, were they secretly plotting to overthrow him? Who knows? On May 2nd, 1972, Dellacroce was arrested at his Ravenite Social Club on Mulberry Street. He was charged with tax evasion and released on $15,000 bail. Dellacroce had reported that from 1965 to 1968, he received a $200 weekly income from the Royal Crown Bottling Company in Newark, New Jersey. And at the time of his arrest, he claimed he was a partner in a drain cleaning company called Mohawk Sewer Services. In March of 1973, Dellacroce would be convicted and sentenced to 5 years. 3 years later, on October 15, 1976, Carlo Gambino passed away at his home in Massapequa, Long Island. Prior to his death, he appointed his cousin, Paul Castellano, as his successor. At the time, Dellacroce was still in prison, but upon his release, sometime in November 1976, he had a meeting with Castellano, who not only kept him as his underboss, but honored the agreement he had with Gambino, where he would control the Manhattan and Queens crews. When it became official that Castellano was the new boss, and not Dellacroce, the news upset some of the crews and its members. One in particular was the Fatico crew, which included John Gotti, who was in prison at the time for the McBratney hit. From that point on, the Gambino family was somewhat divided, with two factions, those loyal to Dellacroce and those to Castellano. Dellacroce and Castellano both resided in Staten Island and had similar backgrounds in the butcher industry. Strangely enough, they both kept gumadas. Dellacroce would even father children with Rosemary, and Castellano, as we know, had an affair with his maid, Gloria. The two bosses would bump heads in the early 80s, and this was over the Gotti crew dealing drugs. And again, it was Dellacroce who stuck to protocol and Cosa Nostra rules by preaching to Gotti and his crew how they had to respect their boss. Dellacroce at that time was in possession of the match to that lingering Gambino TNT, but he chose not to light it. For him, Cosa Nostra came before pride. As a boss, Castellano naturally invoked fear in people. Obviously, Gotti feared he would be killed. So Castellano could be viewed as deadly, but on another level. One where he could easily order a person's death or push a button, as they used to say. I haven't found anything suggesting he personally killed anyone, but that doesn't mean he never did. However, Dellacroce was known to have put in plenty of work and was feared and respected on a much different level. Castellano may have been a better businessman, as he handled his position like the boss of a Fortune 500 company, but Dellacroce knew the life like no one else. For example, during the 2 years or so that the FBI had bugs planted in Castellano's house, not once was Dellacroce seen at the house or is heard on any of those tapes. Let me quickly mention the Super Thanks icon found under the 3-dot dropdown, and I mention it because I don't impose Patreon or sell any merchandise. So essentially, it's the only means of supporting this podcast. We obviously know Dellacroce and Castellano left this earth in totally opposite fashions. Dellacroce developed brain cancer and passed away on December 2nd, 1985. 2 weeks later, Castellano was shot to death outside a Spark Steakhouse, an event that even as the boss of the Gambino family, he couldn't prevent from happening. So my next statement will add all the weight necessary as to who was true boss material. Had Neil Dellacroce not died on December 2nd, 1985, December 16th, 1985 does not take place.